what a lot of people underestimate in lying is rather than being about creativity, being about preparedness.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else would like watching a movie with us. Welcome to Backseat Directing,
where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more.
We're your hosts,
Andrew
and Aaron.
And today we are talking about the 2013 film Prisoners.
3, 2, 1, action.
One for the blooper reel. And action. If you're just tuning in on audio, Aaron has a new special prop for the set, which is, what would you call this? It's directors use it to initiate a new scene, kind of in cartoons.
We're not real directors, but it fell and made a loud noise. Anyways, Andrew, today we watched Prisoners, and now we're recording a podcast right after we watch it. This is the fastest turnaround we've had. From watching something to recording a podcast. I'm excited. This movie's fresh in our mind. What'd you think?
Well, I think people are going to roast us a lot more aggressively now if we get details wrong, because we literally just watched the movie 5 minutes ago.
Okay, so pressure's on.
But I think this movie is really great. When I initially watched it, you had recommended it to me about a year ago, and I watched it in 2 sittings because life gets in the way.
What a shame.
It's a 2.5 hour long movie, so I sat for an hour. I had other things I had to do, and I went back and finished it a day or 2 later. And you were not a big fan of that, so now we got to watch it all the way through together.
Yeah, in order to feel the emotional impact of this movie, I feel like you have to watch it all the way through in one sitting. And that's how I like watching movies the most. I feel like that's how they were meant to be watched. But at the same time, I feel like that deters me from watching movies sometimes when I don't have enough time or whatever, rather than just starting half of it and then finishing half later. You didn't stop it because you didn't like it.
Yeah, of course not. So. I mean, if you ask me my opinion on the movie, I'll tell you that it's nothing unique. I think the movie is absolutely fantastic. The cinematography by Deakins is amazing. Directing by Villeneuve, amazing. Great performances by everybody involved in this cast. It's a phenomenal movie all around. And looking at the Oscars that year, I feel like it was kind of snubbed in terms of nominations, and even I think there were some deserved Oscar wins where it was really only nominated for one thing, which was cinematography, which it lost. It lost to Gravity, which is a phenomenally well shot film as well. But some of the other aspects of the movie, I think, were underappreciated by the Academy. But what were your thoughts on the movie?
I love this movie. This is one of my favorite movies. I love Hugh Jackman. I love Jake Gyllenhaal. They're on the top of my actors list. But yeah, I watched this probably back in 2013 or 14, not too long after it came out. I remember loving it back then, and I don't think I've really seen it since then. Maybe I have one other time, so it was fun to watch it again because I didn't remember all the details of it, so like in a sense it was like I was watching it again for the first time for certain parts of it, which was fun because like the movie was new in that way, but I know the general gist of the movie, so I could pay attention to maybe little details that I missed the first time watching it. And then watching it with you was a lot of fun too, because we could kind of talk about specific shots as they were happening, or like, why did the director decide to shoot through the window here?
Yeah.
Or why did the actor do this? Or like, why did the camera pan onto the dollhouse for that long? Like, there's a lot of nuance that we got to talk about as we were watching the movie, which I thought was a fun experience.
I think that we added about an hour to the runtime of the movie, pausing to talk about aspects of the movie.
Yeah, I don't think anyone else would like watching a movie with us. But I had a lot of fun watching this movie with you today because we got to break it down. And if it was our first time watching it, we probably wouldn't have stopped it that many times and talked about it and all that stuff. We would have just watched it straight through. But since it was our second time, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we had the luxury upon rewatch to look for these clues and details and small things that you're talking about, which is what
we know what's happening or what's going to happen.
I mean, the first watch is always the best and it's special, but this is what I love about a second watch or a rewatch is the ability to do this and dissect the film more, where you don't have to pay as much attention to the plot. And we are gonna be spoiling the movie, so heads up. This movie's been out for almost 10 years, so we're gonna go ahead and go straight into spoiling it. But just looking at small details throughout the movie, like throughout the investigation, like you said, there were things that I forgot, that in those aspects it was similar to watching the movie for the first time, where I was wondering, oh, is Bob Taylor the child of this woman, or is Alex Jones the child? How is Bob Taylor connected to this? Like, there were things that the movie has so many intricacies.
How did the detective get at the priest's house?
I didn't know that. Yeah, I was initially confused by that, because the movie kind of wraps you up into the investigation. Where when the kids go missing, you start to feel that dread and that panic, and it folds you into like the sadness and the lost, and then
happens very fast. Yeah. The pacing in this movie, I think, is fantastic, right? There's always something new happening, even when there's not something new happening in terms of the investigation.
Yeah, but that can get you caught up where you miss small details. When, in an investigation of missing children, they are trying to solve that case. So
they also didn't take like 40 minutes to introduce the family and get connected to the kids. Like it kind of just happened right away. And then they relied on the actors' emotions to show us the connection.
That's what's brilliant about a movie like this is I think this movie, and let's start going into talking about specifics in the movie. So we'll start with the director. Denis Villeneuve is a French director who has some amazing films, and I think he's possibly the biggest strength of this movie. And what we were just talking about, where there's really no fat on this movie. Even when it's 2.5 hours, you feel like there's nothing that's needed to cut out. You're locked in the whole time. Even in the slow moments where the pace settles and they bring it down for you to feel the emotional beats, you're still locked in the whole way. I think there's no fat in this movie. With things like that's a perfect example. They don't take 40 minutes because the emotional stakes are that 2 young girls are missing. You don't need to know their entire life story, whereas another filmmaker might have made that mistake of wasting time. You already love them from the beginning. They're just cute little innocent children. You're like, oh, that's sweet. They love each other. They're playing with their pets together. Like, that's enough. And then for them to go missing is heart-wrenching and gut-wrenching. And then, like you said, they play off the reactions of the family members. So there's really no wasted time.
Yeah. So it might have been a while for some of our listeners since they've seen this movie again. So I want to kind of go over a brief summary, and then we'll kind of go into like the ratings, the budget, and all that stuff. So in this psychological thriller, Keller Dover's daughter Anna and her friend Joy go missing on Thanksgiving. They're like 6 years old or so. The only lead is an old RV that was parked in front of a house on their street. The house that the RV is parked in front of is for sale, which kind of connects later into the story. The head detective, Loki, arrests the driver, Alex, but doesn't have enough evidence to hold him. Keller Dover then decides to take matters in his own hands. He doesn't really trust the police department anymore since they let Keller Dover go, or let Alex go. So he kind of goes outside the law and tries to find his daughter and his daughter's friend. We've already said this movie came out in 2013. It's rated R, 2 hours and 33 minutes. IMDb rating has it at 8.1 out of 10.
Incredibly high.
Yep. Rotten Tomatoes, pretty much the same thing. It has it at 81% for the critics and an 87% for the audience score.
Well deserved.
Yep. The budget for this movie was $46 million, and the box office brought in $122.1 million.
For this type of movie, I think that's an absolutely crushing success.
Yes.
$122 million for a dark, R-rated thriller like this, I think, is a huge, huge win for the studio. And I think Denis proved he could crush it. Looking at IMDb, Denis Villeneuve, again, the director, before this movie, I believe he had mostly done films that weren't marketed primarily toward American audiences, more artistic and independent films, maybe European films. This was a huge breakthrough and success, and it was widely loved by audiences. Since then, he's done movies like Enemy, which I believe was filmed around the same time but came out afterwards. So Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal as well. Sicario.
He was working on that one before this one came out.
And then Sicario, Arrival, Blade Runner 2049, and Dune, just to name a few of Denis' movies. They are fantastic movies. Worked a lot with Roger Deakins, who's a cinematographer on this film and one of the best in the business. Deakins has been director of photography for Shawshank Redemption, one of the greatest movies of all time, Fargo, Big Lebowski, A Beautiful Mind, True Grit, Skyfall, Sicario, Blade Runner 2049, where he, along with Sicario, where he worked with Denis as well, and 1917. He's been a DP since 1975, so almost 50 years now. Deakins is a huge name and widely revered and considered one of the best to ever do it in the game of cinematography. I think that's showcased in this film. It doesn't feel like somebody who's learning to do cinematography. It feels like somebody who has mastered the art.
Yeah,
the lighting in the scene.
Every shot is intentional.
Every shot is a
story,
piece of artwork.
Meaning to it. It's incredible. Andrew, who's in this movie?
This movie, so I like this section. I like talking about who's behind in front of the camera. Let's pay homage to the names. So this movie has Hugh Jackman as Keller Dover, Jake Gyllenhaal as Detective Loki, Viola Davis as Nancy Birch.
I didn't remember that she was in this movie.
It's great to see her, and it's crazy. Her and her husband in the movie, her husband's Franklin Birch, who's played by Terrence Howard, are like side characters essentially. They have a good amount of screen time, but these phenomenal actors that signed on to this project to play supporting roles. It's like a huge, incredible ensemble cast in a lot of ways. Maria Bello plays Grace Dover. We have Melissa Leo as Holly Jones, Paul Dano as Alex Jones, her nephew / kidnap victim, because I already said we're spoiling the show, or the movie. Dylan Minnette as Ralph Dover, who, if you're wondering where you recognize him from, it is likely from 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. And David Dastmalchian as Bob Taylor, whose name I hope I'm close to pronouncing correctly.
Yeah, fantastic cast. I think Hugh and Jake knocked it out of the park.
I think Paul Dano shines in this movie a lot as well.
Yes.
I think we'll talk about it maybe a little bit more in depth in the plot, but I think Hugh Jackman steals the show in this movie.
Yes.
But I think Paul Dano also shines really bright for me. Melissa Leo as ultimately the villain, when she does have screen time, is really great. Oh, and the heart strings that the mothers pull in this movie, Viola Davis and Maria, oh my goodness, like that's we talked about watching the movie. During watching it, like it's basically a movie that keeps you on the edge of tears or on the edge of your seat, just on a cliff of emotions the whole time. Like when you're not crying, you feel like you could cry the whole movie. And I feel
for different reasons.
Yeah.
Out of anger, out of sadness, out of regret. Like there's so many emotions going on in this movie. And I think we were mentioning it before we started recording. Hugh Jackman does a fantastic job at displaying emotion in this movie. And we've seen him do anger, like with Logan and all of the Wolverine movies, which he displays here in incredible fashion. But then we also get to see the regret and the sadness and the kind of like when he's beating himself up, like you can really see that within him. And then Jake Gyllenhaal too, just like the subtle little ticks that he does, like with his eyes, and the way he carries himself as a detective is really, really close to how I feel a detective presents themselves.
Yeah, we were talking about it during watching the movie because we both have known law enforcement officers and have experience, adjacent to that. I got a criminal justice degree growing up at UCF and attended a lot of classes where they talked about law enforcement techniques and just the realism that he injects into this character. I saw an interview where he talks about how he knew a lot of law enforcement people. He said he had a lot of friends in law enforcement because of his experience in previous work, which we're assuming, right, End of Watch, that he met a lot of law enforcement when working on preparing for that role and being involved in that film on set. So he really displays a lot of mannerisms that we touched on, like noticing throughout the film. Like one thing they call active listening, where you'll repeat back what the person said to you, or acknowledge their feelings repeatedly. Say, I understand what you're saying. I hear what you're going through. Repeating those things over and over again, encouraging them to calm down when they're getting excited, to de-escalate a situation. We talked about, you mentioned how he maintains control of the scenario, of the investigation in the household with the parents of the victims, while also sort of doing this dance around their feelings. You
can also tell that he doesn't want to be in this situation.
Yeah, he's uncomfortable. Like, anyone would be.
He's uncomfortable, and you can see that on camera. But at the same time, he has total control of the scene, which is fantastic.
He settles down, Mr. Dover, when he starts to get out of control, and you see Keller recognize that in himself and change his tone of voice.
Yeah.
They ultimately all have the same goal, and on some level they know that, but the parents are just unraveling throughout. I mean, Maria does such a great job displaying the stages of grief in a mother, of losing her child. We see her in denial in her very first conversation with Loki, saying, no, I'm sure they must have just turned up somewhere. They must be out hiding or playing. I'm sure they'll come back. I'm sure they just ran away. And then we see her go to anger, pushing her husband away, to depression and bawling, and she wants to do nothing but sleep. And that's where it really hurts to watch, because we all have family members in our lives, kids in our lives, whether they're kids or just loved ones, that you can imagine. You think you can imagine what it would be like to lose them and be in that situation, and you feel your heart like reaches out to her. It's so emotional.
Yeah, it kind of goes and asks, it makes you, when you're watching, ask the question, like, what would you do in this situation? Much like Law Abiding Citizen that we just did an episode on last week. I don't know what it is, but we have this little kick going on these psychological thriller
revenge
movies.
Stories.
But like, same thing, like, what would you do if your kid was kidnapped? Like, how far would you go?
And Keller Dover, the scary thing about this movie, right, is that Keller Dover is the ultimate master of preparedness. He is the doomsday prepper. He is the person who's ready for disaster. But when a disaster like this strikes, there's ultimately nothing that he can do. That's the scary thing as a viewer.
But he's prepared for like the end of the world and all that stuff. Like, he has a bunch of food in his basement and supplies and all that stuff. But he's even prepared for something like this happening before. He gave his 6-year-old daughter a little red whistle that's like, hey, if you're ever in danger, or if you're far from me or whatever, and you need to get someone's attention, you blow this whistle and help will come.
The scary thing is that the thought that this could happen to someone who is even the most cautious among us, like Keller Dover.
And that's why I think he beats himself up so much more than Franklin did.
Yeah, he blames himself ultimately. And we talked about that in the scene where he talks to Loki when he sees the bloody sock. He says, you did this. You wasted time that you could have been, when you could have been looking for him, you were looking for me. You did this. And it's him projecting his guilt onto someone else.
So tough to watch, and that's where I would like specifically talk about how Hugh Jackman displayed a bunch of emotions all at once. Like, he's kind of angry that he's there, his wife isn't there, he's trying to hide this from his wife in a sense to save her from having to go through this. So he's doing this alone. He's carrying all the burden of the family on his shoulders, like we've seen kind of throughout the whole film. And he's looking through these photos. He's like, no, I don't recognize that piece of clothing. No. And he's kind of angry that he has to go through this. And like, every piece of clothing that he doesn't recognize is someone else's kid's clothing, So I'm sure he's processing that at the same time.
Although ultimately we find out that that's clothing all had the tag still on it. That's what he was buying at the outlet
But he
store.
didn't know that then.
Yeah,
None
true.
of them did.
Yeah.
And then when he saw his daughter's sock, and he just lost it.
The first thing he says is no.
Yeah.
It's just like the way the no pours over his lips is like,
it's not like
unintentional.
It's not like a no that like, no, I don't recognize that. It's like a no, like this can't be.
Yeah, it's this just like a gasp. It's like a breath.
Yeah.
And every aspect.
It's like it didn't mean to come out.
Yeah. He's such mastery and control of his performance, of like everything of his speech, of his eyes, of his jaws, the way his hands shake as he holds the photo of his daughter.
He's crying so much, but he's trying to hide that he's crying. So then it just kind of busts out in ways that's, I feel like, really hard to do when you're not actually in that state. You know, like he's trying to hold it in, you know, when you're crying like that, like it's hard to breathe and stuff, and maybe holding your breath a little bit. Like at one point his cheeks kind of filled with air, and then his lips kind of filled with air, and it just kind of came out in like a deep breath and kind of, you know, like,
we know that feeling.
And then you see his tears like build up in his eyes. They didn't just start pouring, you know, they built up first. Like it was just a very emotional scene and very well performed. And we haven't talked about Detective Loki too much, but in this scene too, he does a good job of, like, he looks sad, he looks sorry, but he's trying to hold it together himself. You know, he's not making eye contact with Dover. You know, he's kind of keeping it to himself, just trying to ask the questions that he needs to, and he feels it, but at the same time he's trying to disconnect from it so he can do his job the best that he can. You know, like, you can see so much going on through these actors' performances.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just what they have is a complete mastery over themselves, you know, because we can all identify with that visceral feeling of whether it's being in that position where you're having an emotional outbreak and you feel like the slightest breeze could send you into those tears pouring and you can't control your breathing. And we have that feeling of being next to that person and being and wanting to reach out to them and not knowing what to do. But it's their control of their entire selves that lets them replicate that on screen when, for all intents in the world, they have no reason to feel that way, but they manufacture it. And it's incredibly impressive. Hugh Jackman, like I touched on earlier, should have been nominated and won Best Actor this year in 2014 with the Oscars.
For sure. Going back to just their preparedness for this role, Jake Gyllenhaal in an interview said that he was watching a lot of film on interviews and interrogations and stuff, and in one of them he watched that was like 4 to 5 hours long, and he said he watched the whole thing, and he realized throughout that the interrogator was slowly, over the course of the hours, getting closer and closer to the suspect. You know, like whether it's scooting in the chair, or then he's on the side of the table, and then he's next to him, and then by the end of it, they're up against the wall, and he's kind of holding the suspect against the wall, not forcefully, but they're really close together. They're both standing, and he said on the tape that the detective, the interrogator, like touched him on the shoulder, you know, just to like kind of mess with them a little bit, show how close they are, make it more personable in a sense. So he showed that to the director, and they were like, that's good. And he ended up doing that in the scene with Alex when they first bring him in and they're interrogating him and stuff. And he has him up against the wall, he has his hand over his shoulder, and then he like touches the ear, and you see Alex kind of go away from it, you know, kind of makes him uncomfortable a little bit, you know. So just the preparedness that these actors went through sold the movie.
If you listen this far, we would love to thank you for your time. Thank you for listening, enjoying the show. We do post episodes every Monday and Thursday about all kinds of topics. For example, this week, this episode will be coming out on Monday, and then Thursday, our next upcoming episode will be on Tag. So a comedy, completely different topics, all kinds of stuff that we cover. Comment and let us know what you want to hear about next.
Yeah, and if you're keeping up with us, you know, last week we did a giveaway. We look forward to doing another one. We're grateful for everyone who participated in that. And we're excited to keep growing this podcast and this platform. And let's dive right back into Prisoners.
Yeah, let's get into the plot. So we are going to talk about, the movie starts off with just a beautiful shot of Keller Dover hunting with his son. And they set the tone of the movie right away. It's played out slow, quiet, and emotional. Just this prayer being said before the son shoots the deer. That metaphorical, you know, taking of life. The seriousness of that, showing that Keller believes in being self-sufficient and doing what needs to be done when necessary. They say that killing these animals is done to help so that they aren't overpopulated, that you shouldn't feel guilty for killing the deer because you eat meat at McDonald's. So it just goes all from the very beginning into the mindset of the characters and the family. pretty quickly from there, we get into the crux of the plot, which is that on Thanksgiving, the two young daughters, Joy and Anna, leave the house to go back to Anna's house. And at some point during their little trip, they are kidnapped. And they had seen a suspicious RV earlier in the day, which is pretty much their only clue to go on. The parents, once they realize that it's a serious situation, call the police and get them involved. And then we get our first introduction to Detective Loki, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. They come up on the RV, which has been spotted in a rest stop parking lot. And that's where they find Alex Jones, played by Paul Dano. So they end up in the interrogation room with Paul Dano, and they still haven't found these girls. And Alex Jones is mentally challenged, and they say he has the IQ of a 10-year-old, so he's really difficult to interview. They can't get much information from him. The rest of the plot from here is super emotional. It can be hard to watch at times. It's really makes you feel like their loss is your loss, mm-hmm. and you feel like you're in that community in the candlelight vigil. Like you feel like you're mourning the loss of these kidnapped children alongside everybody because the plot is so personal.
Yeah, so they kept Alex in interrogation for 2 days. They had 48 hours, and then they didn't have enough to hold him, so they let him go.
Yeah, Loki interrogates him for 10 straight hours, he says.
Yes, and as they let him go, Dover shows up, played by Hugh Jackman.
Furious.
And he's very upset that he's letting him go. And he grabs Alex and he's like, "Where's my daughter? Where are they? Where are they?" And Alex whispers to him, "They didn't cry until I left."
What a chilling line.
And you just see Hugh's eyes like widen, and he grabs even harder, and he's, "What did you just say?"
And then it takes
about
about 6 police officers to rip them apart and to hold Dover down because he's just erupting with fury.
And this is the first time that Alex has like acknowledged anything that's been going on. So then like we're immediately thinking as the audience, like, is he smarter than we're being led to believe? Does he understand what situation that he's in? Like,
yeah, like you said, everything we hear from Alex before that point, he's kind of saying, "Oh, please don't touch me. Can I have my glasses? Like, can I have water?" Like these simple requests, not really acknowledging the severity of the situation.
Yeah, do you know where the girls are? No. Like one word answers, seems kind of confused, you know. But that was the first time where Dover was like, he did it.
And then we're wondering if it's all an act.
Yeah.
And ultimately the cops not necessarily ignoring, but not having much to go on other than Keller Dover being the only one who heard him say this. So they don't really have any other proof than a man who to them seems somewhat deranged. They don't really respond to this new piece of evidence, this that Keller heard Alex Jones say, and this leads Dover down the road of taking things into his own hands.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, did you hear him say that, or did you imagine him saying that?
Because you want to believe that you're getting closer to finding your daughters, which is understandable in the situation where a parent could make up anything in that situation just to give themselves some closure, hope, some clue. Yeah, hope, exactly. And this movie it strings you along on hope because they tell you, after the first week, the chances of finding them are way slimmer. So they have the ticking clock aspect and the cat and mouse aspect. That's something Hugh Jackman says is that's what keeps you on the edge of your seat. But that's also what gives hope because you say, oh, they still have another day.
So this is where Keller Dover, again played by Hugh Jackman, takes matters into his own hands, and he goes to Alex Jones' house, and he's just kind of scouting it out, just kind of looking. You know, he's sitting across the street in his car. It's late at night, and he sees Alex come outside walking his dog. And Alex stops at the end of the driveway, kind of looks around a little bit, and then just yanks up his dog on the leash. It's a small little dog, you know, just is holding him as the dog is choking and being strangled to death by his own leash, and holds him for a good 20 seconds or so, puts him down, and then continues to walk him, goes across the street, relatively right in front of Dover's car, and is singing the song that the little girls were singing that morning.
Jingle bells. And I tell you, when I watched this movie the first time, when he lifted the dog up by the leash, my jaw dropped to the floor. I was like, oh my goodness. He just gave the performance of a lifetime. He's a maniac, and he actually did it. And that's where my brain went the first time watching it. And
there's some sort of intention here now.
It seems so malicious.
Yes.
Like, it seems like the mind of somebody evil.
He's not innocent of everything, if anything at all. So this is where Dover approaches Alex, and he pulls out his gun. He's like, "Where's my daughter?" That's the song that they were singing this morning.
Where did you hear that song?
Yeah, where did you hear that song? And he doesn't really say anything, and that's kind of where things take a turn. And Dover kidnaps Alex and brings him to an abandoned building that he owns. It used to be his father's building. It's an apartment building. It needs a lot of renovations. It's nowhere close to being open, right? And he starts interrogating Alex on his own. And this is where he brings in Franklin, the father of the other daughter, Joy. And Franklin is very much of like the beta, right? He's kind of back off. He doesn't really agree with what's going on here. He doesn't want any part of this, but at the same time, he understands where Dover's coming from, and he wants his daughter back. So he reluctantly participates in this kind of interrogation. And
torture.
Yes, it elevates to torture very quickly.
Yeah.
They have him handcuffed. They start punching him, or Dover starts punching him. Franklin kind of is just holding him and stuff. So.
Franklin is resistant throughout, and there's even a line later in the movie where he says, "Dover, despite what you might think of me, I would die for my daughter." And so the movie begs the question, and I want to make a point about the cinematography here too, but the movie begs the question of doing what's right versus maybe doing what's needed, if you can say that that's what's needed. And there is a difference between the two. Dover believes he's doing what's needed, and Franklin believes in that. He keeps saying, this isn't right. This isn't right. And he says, I want my daughter just as bad as you want your daughter. But that doesn't mean that we should do this. But Hugh Jackman's character is about the ends justify the means. So I think a lot of times in the cinematography, you'll see the characters either backlit or frontlit in a way that they're almost entirely a silhouette, where they're just a shadowed figure. And I think that darkness represents just them as a cloak, as a shadow, represents the moral ambiguity of the characters in the movie. So even Loki, the protagonist here of the film, is morally ambiguous as well, kind of stretching and bending the law as he sees fit. And I think most of us as an audience, me included, certainly have no qualms with the lengths that Loki goes to. He's doing it for righteous reasons. And he, I believe, doesn't seem to cross any morally corrupt lines, maybe legally corrupt lines he does cross. Keller crosses all the lines. But as an audience,
you're kind of rooting for him.
You're still rooting for him because you want those girls to come home safe.
Right.
And the filmmakers have shown you enough to justify what he's doing, even though it's unjustifiable. They've shown you enough that Alex seems to be hiding something.
Yes.
So you cringe. You're kind of like the Birches. You're kind of like Franklin and his wife Viola Davis's character. You're kind of like, I don't necessarily support what he's doing, but I do support his goals.
Yeah. So this is a good transition. So right as Dover's kind of taking matters into his own hands, Detective Loki is trying to follow up other leads, and we get to see the dynamic between him and the captain, I'm presuming.
Yeah.
That's who it was.
Oh my gosh, the captain.
How there
was supposed to be a detail on Alex Jones's house, Captain.
Yeah. I need to know what's going on, and if you're not going to do something, you got to let me know. Like their relationship and dynamic on screen is really interesting, right? Because they're working together. They have the same goal, but at the same time, they have different ways of going about it. I'm sure the captain has a lot more cases that he's involved in and stuff. And, so Loki seems to be 100% focused on this case, so.
Yeah, I think that in that case is probably the number one priority in that town right now.
Right.
But the captain, he's a captain. He's always got other things on his plate. He's managing all the personnel. So
yeah, you can see the kind of frustration between them. But Loki goes out, and his only next lead, is to look at sex offenders that are in the area. So we see him go to a few different houses, and
that's
stuff.
the link I was missing.
And that's where he finds the priest, which, first off, priest on the sex offender list. Ruh-roh.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Should be one of the prerequisites.
So he's knocking on the door.
Not do that.
He's like, priest, father, knock, knock, police, I need to talk to you. And no one's answering, so he kind of goes around to the side of the house, looks through the window, and he sees the priest on the floor. So that's for him as probable cause. So he busts down the front door, gets inside, realizes that the priest is just passed out drunk on the floor. So this is kind of where you were talking about how maybe he crosses those legal lines a little bit.
He says, "You mind if I start?"
Yeah, he's like, mind if I look around?
The priest just...
The priest never said no. So he took it upon himself to kind of search the house, and he found that the fridge has been slid over to the side, which is weird. So he moved the fridge over, found a door. It ends up leading to the basement. I'd imagine it kind of smells bad down there. So he's a little suspicious, and he jumps in, pulls out his flashlight, looking around the basement. The basement's huge, kind of empty. It's got some religious...
paraphernalia?
Yeah, and stuff. And then he finds a chair knocked over on its side with a person tied to it, and we get to see this little maze necklace that this person's wearing. And this person looks like he's been there for a while, months. He's tied to the chair, obviously dead. And this necklace is like the maze that we see on all of the promotional material for this movie.
Let's connect the dots now for listeners, because we're already spoiling. So that man who he finds in the basement of the priest's house, the dead man with the necklace, is the same husband of, what is her name? Miss Jones, the Holly Jones, the villain in the end of the movie. So she says they had an argument. He left one day and never came back. Presumably he went and confessed to the priest. The priest lured him back to his house, and the priest killed him. Because the priest is, there's different kinds of child molesters. And one of the kinds is that they genuinely believe that they love children. Mm-hmm. So the priest is likely representative of that, somebody who believes that he's actually affectionate towards these kids, even though he's hurting them.
There's a lot of storytelling in this movie that's not actually told.
Yeah.
Which is really
inferred,
cool.
Yeah.
I love it when movies do that. Less telling, more showing.
Yeah,
and that was one of those aspects.
Yeah, you helped me connect some dots there. So that's where I am now from you helping me understand it. That's how I see the priest as taking vengeance for those 16 children that
he killed.
That he confessed to killing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's only how many he killed. We find out later in the movie that Alex was a kidnapped boy.
And they let go Bob Taylor as well. So potentially more victims.
Exactly. But yeah, so they're kind of, Jake and Keller, Dover are kind of going on, Jake Gyllenhaal, Detective Loki. They're kind of going on separate paths here. And then, how did Detective Loki kind of get back onto the scent of Hugh? Of Keller?
So when Bob Taylor breaks into the house, she calls Loki. He comes over and she takes him into the basement to check for the kids, where he sees the lie on the ground. And then he notices that the wife says that Dover hasn't been home, and he knows he hasn't been out there searching. So he's basically, his whereabouts are unaccounted for, and he sees the lye on the ground, which can be used to dissolve corpses. Mm-hmm. So now he's gonna wait to follow Dover, just because he's suspicious of him again, wondering where he's spending his time. Leads to the best scene in the movie, without a doubt. Deakins films it beautifully from that back angle of the seats of the car. The way they're situated towards each other, he's able to capture their whole face and the emotionality. It looks like it's maybe filmed through the back windows of the car, which would be interesting because that shot is full of rain. So they must have had some device to protect the camera from the rain, because it had to be filming through the window outside into to get the angle that they had of the amount of the shot they had on their body. And when he sees Hugh Jackman walking towards the apartment to torture Alex, Hugh Jackman, Dover, identifies Loki watching him, grabs a drink, and comes and approaches him, and they have an intense conversation that makes for some of the best dialogue and acting in the movie.
Yeah, that's another spot where you really get to see Hugh kind of dive into the emotion of this movie and of the father of someone whose daughter's just got kidnapped. And he's like, this is my responsibility. It's on me. It's not on you. And
I sometimes just look up and watch that scene. It's not even like workout motivation. It's just like when you want
energy. You feel the energy from it.
It's just emotional, and sometimes you just feel like watching something
he's
like
intense. Hitting his chest, and like he's getting into it.
It's one of the best scenes in film for me. The dialogue to me is so good. It shows the way, like you said, that Dover takes the weight of the world on his shoulders, and
you can see how much this is impacting him, because he went and grabbed a drink, even though that wasn't his original intention. He was going to the apartment buildings next door where he has Alex.
He said he hasn't had a drink in almost 10 years
or something. Like, to go in there and get a drink, like, after being sober for that long, it shows how much weight this has been on him, and he's like, thing that put me over the edge was you. He continuously throughout the movie redirects the blame onto Detective Loki, and Detective Loki does a great job absorbing it.
Yeah.
And not backlashing it back or anything. Because that's like, as a person, that's typically your natural move. You know, like if I say something towards you, it's your fault. It's because of you this happened. Your natural instinct is to be like, no, it's you. You did this part. You did that part.
Absorbing it is, I think, the perfect word to describe it, because that's exactly what he does. Loki knows that he can't push this back onto somebody, a father whose daughter is missing. He knows he can't do that. And I think to an extent, he also blames himself. Because they said he's solved every case he's ever been on. That's a lot of pressure he must put on himself. So I think he also blames himself for not finding them sooner.
Something you said while we were watching the movie, when they said that he solved all his cases, is that just because they solved the case doesn't mean he finds the kid.
Yeah. He could find who took the kid.
Right.
And the kid
doesn't mean that he's working only abductions either.
Yeah.
So like, I'm sure Detective Loki wasn't too happy that the captain said that, because it puts a lot of pressure on him.
It does.
That isn't necessarily needed. And like, yes, Detective Loki is there to try to find your kids. Like, he's going to do everything that he can. But now there's that extra pressure of like, you've done this before. You're 100% successful at this.
Yeah. He says,
why can't you find my kid?
He says to Grace Dover, I will find your daughter. And I think that a lot of people in those situations, they say, don't make promises you can't keep. But there's also a line later in the movie that I agree with. The captain says, either way, like when they're letting Alex go, he says, either way, if you find his daughter, he'll get over it. And if you don't find his daughter, he's going to hate your guts. Mm-hmm. Which is ultimately true throughout, whether he's making promises he can't keep or not. That is the only thing that matters, is if he finds the little girls or not. And he definitely feels the weight of that. And in this scene, the lines from Hugh Jackman of, every day she's wondering why I'm not there to save her. Not you, but me. It shows how he takes the guilt. He absorbs the guilt, and whatever he's saying to Loki is a projection of that guilt he feels onto someone else, because he has to unload some of that weight. It's so crushing when the mother, Grace Dover, what Grace says to him, she says, you were supposed to protect us. You made me feel safe. And that's all he wanted in the world, was for his family to be safe and feel safe. And he feels that he's betrayed that now, when in reality, They did everything they were supposed to do.
And like he was more prepared than most. Like I never got a little safety whistle when I was a kid.
Kids sometimes just don't listen. And they told them to go and get the older siblings who, if they were present, this never would have happened. But the girls did not go and get them. Sometimes kids don't listen. And it's just, you know, a tragedy that is nobody's fault. They're a little kid. It's not their fault either.
Yeah.
It's the fault of the villain in the story.
Let's continue the story. So they go to like this memorial thing with candles and all that, and there's Detective Loki's there, and he starts to see this suspicious figure. He's kind of caressing this stuffed animal that's laid on the ground, and then they kind of look at each other, and they both know that like they're on to each other.
Yeah, if you saw a full-grown man caressing a stuffed animal at a candlelit vigil for lost children, like, wouldn't you be...
Something's up. So Detective Loki starts to walk his way, and that guy starts to walk the other way, and then ends up running.
Turns into Captain America, running as fast as a car. He disappears.
So while he's chasing him, he's going through like back... yards of houses and stuff, and you see like the motion sensor lights turn on, you see your dog barking, and he's kind of over the fence and up in like this tree house or something. And this is one of the times that I thought Jake Gyllenhaal did a great job of displaying like what a detective would do in this situation. You know, he senses that there's some sort of danger. There's a dog that's clearly agitated as well. He pulls out his gun. He keeps it real close to him. He's just being real cautious because this guy that just ran is hiding in a dark treehouse or a shed or whatever. He doesn't know exactly where he's at.
His character is always wise to picking up on clues like the floor in the house, and then he's wondering probably, why is the dog still barking if I can't see him?
He's got to be over here somewhere. I don't know if he has a weapon or not. I'm going to draw up my weapon. He gets to the fence. He puts his weapon away very quickly, jumps over and pulls it out right back very quickly. And I thought that was very subtle detail. And like, I don't know if you've ever had like a gun holster on and stuff, like, but if you haven't done it a few times, you know, like it takes it a little bit to get it out, you know, but he pulls it out so quick, like you can tell he's practiced drawing the weapon over and over and over. And of course we've referenced the other movie that he's in where he plays the cop.
End of Watch.
Yeah,
in real police training, they practice drawing your firearm hundreds of times.
Yeah.
Because you do not want it to be...
So I was in, like you said, you have a
criminal justice background.
Yep. And I was in Police Explorers as a teenager. Not saying
education-wise for me.
Yeah, not saying I know a lot about what it takes to be a cop, but I did learn some things of how cops go about presenting themselves and whatnot. And we did do like where we'd draw out our weapon over and over and over again, and we would do it like, how many times can you get it out in a minute? How many, you know, like, or we would do like 5 minutes of just drawing your weapon. Because if it takes a half a second to get out and you stumble and get it in a second, that could be your life, you know? So Jake Gyllenhaal looked very comfortable performing the tasks of holding himself as a detective.
I love when actors do that. Like Keanu's level of dedication to the John Wick franchise and the comfortability he develops with firearms for that, it adds so much to the realism to be able to see the actor's face on screen, being the actual one doing those things and looking like professional. I think that it's such an important detail for the film director to hire, you know, consultants and professionals, law enforcement, so that they can handle themselves similarly, because that realism really shines.
Yeah, so let's kind of continue with the story here. Who is this guy that Jake Gyllenhaal is chasing?
Okay, so he ultimately gets away in the scene that we're referencing, but they put out a APB for him with a police sketch, which we talked about during the movie, how hard it would be. Like, he saw him in the cover of Dark wearing a hood. Like, we were saying, like, could you even provide an accurate description of your wife that you see every day?
Even you, like, right now in front of me. Like, if
there was a wall on my side and there was on the other side of the wall the sketch artist, how much would the drawing look like me?
Right, and how long would it take? Like, even if I looked at you right now for 10 seconds and then covered up your face and had to describe it to a sketch artist, I don't know how accurate.
What would you say?
It would be so tough. Like,
his nose is
his
a
lips
nose.
Yeah. No, his nostrils are pushed in a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd have to like draw it and then be like, no, like change this, I guess.
Yeah. And now we're trying to imagine doing it with me and you, and we're looking at each other right now. Imagine doing it with the person who served you food this morning at your breakfast.
Yeah.
What do they look like?
She was a woman. I couldn't tell you much about her. I'm not
Crazy.
Sean Spencer, you know? Gotta slip that reference in there.
But anyways, who is this guy?
So ultimately, there's like this value mart where a woman working there spots the man who turns out to be Bob Taylor is the name of the individual.
Yes.
So when Jake Gyllenhaal catches up with him, the woman's able to provide the plates. So Jake Gyllenhaal's character catches up to Bob Taylor at his house, and ultimately there's a great interaction scene there where he says, "You bought children's clothes," and just kind of this tension.
Yeah, I must have been in a hurry.
Okay. You didn't notice they were children's clothes? Yeah,
Like, they're a gift. Say they're a gift.
I know, it's such a better lie. Which I know this is a tangent, but Keller Dover is such a good liar in this movie. Can we wrap back around to that when we're done with the plot?
Yes.
He's a phenomenal liar.
Yes.
So
I'll write that down.
anyway, Jake Gyllenhaal bursts through the door as Bob Taylor's trying to like close the door and lock him out of the house. And what Jake's character, Loki, finds in the house is all these chests and all these mazes written on the wall and a pig's head in the sink. Such a disturbing scene. So the mazes drawn all over the wall so intricately, look like it took so much time. It reminds me of the notebooks from the movie Seven, how they're all filled up with writing. Like, what lunatic dedicates this much time to something like this? He bursts open the crates thinking maybe the kids are locked inside one of these crates. That's what we're assuming Loki's thinking. But the crates are just filled with bloodied children's clothes and snakes.
Snakes.
I don't know if it would have been scarier if the children were inside them. Like, snakes and bloody children's clothes was incredibly ominous.
Yeah.
And
it's not just like one snake.
A ton
they're
of snakes.
small snakes. They're big snakes, and there's like 10 in each of these boxes. And Andrew and I looked at each other when we were watching. We're like, how is he still in there? You know, like, and it's like the motivation that like one of these boxes could hold information to where these kids are at,
or a scared child themselves in it as well. And so everything in this movie is tying together still. So we'll explain it as we go along, because I think that's the easiest way to follow it. So the snakes are a reference to the father who was married to Melissa Leo's character, Holly Jones.
Holly Jones.
So we'll call him Mr. Jones. I don't know if his first name's given in the movie, but Mr. Jones had an infatuation with snakes. And we know later in the film that Bob Taylor was kidnapped by Mr. and Mrs. Jones at some point, and then presumably in a way kept there, tortured there, whether emotional or physical. We don't know what the father, Mr. Jones, was doing to these kids when he was still around.
And Bob Taylor, again, is the guy that Detective Loki just broke into his house and found all these boxes with the snakes.
Yes. So at this point, we're thinking that he might be the kidnapper, but in actuality, he's a past victim of the actual kidnappers in this movie.
Yes.
So he, as a kid, was kidnapped, drugged on some mixture of ketamine and LSD, I think they said, and he lost memory of the incident totally, so he couldn't identify the people who kidnapped him. But this trauma led him down, this kind of dark rabbit hole in life where he read the book. I don't remember what the book was called, but they have this book that's about these famous unsolved kidnappings, and he believed these were his kidnappers, and the book is filled with mazes at the end. So this guy, his life is taken over by this. He becomes obsessed with mazes, becomes obsessed with kidnappings, even to the extent of copycatting the recent kidnapping. That's why he's so obsessed with it, showing up to the candlelight vigil. He sneaks into the houses of the victims, Joy and Anna, the children, takes their clothes and mixes them in with a bunch of other children's clothes to make him seem like he is this big, prolific kidnapper who's been active for over 20 years. And ultimately, they find out that all the blood on the kids' clothes is pig's blood, that the clothes were stolen from the house after the kidnapping, that he is not the kidnapper, but instead he is a copycat, a fake, attempting to take the spot of the actual kidnapper for whatever psychopathic reason he's doing this. And the hunt begins again because this person basically just cost them so much time and energy and wasted their investigation because he was not the actual culprit. And I believe the next thing to happen after there is that Joy escapes. I believe that's the next big plot point. So Joy escapes, and when they go to talk to her at the hospital, she says to Keller Dover, she says, "You were there." And this makes everyone else uneasy. Why were you at the site of, why were you at where she was being held?
Yeah, so we jumped ahead just a little bit, but while this is kind of all happening, Dover is still interrogating Alex. And by
interrogating such a gentle term for what he's doing.
He's torturing him. At this point, he's in the shower, boarded up. No light is getting in, and every once in a while, Dover is churning on and off the water, and it's either boiling water or freezing water.
We're way outside the Geneva Convention here, folks.
Yeah, he's on the edge of death. I don't know how he's still alive at this point.
Honestly, the food and water deprivation on top of all the physical strain on his body, he's been repeatedly beaten savagely. Yes. Neglected, the scalding burns, the freezing water.
Yes. And at this point, too, both Franklin and his wife, Nancy, have seen this room, have seen Alex and all that. So it's not just Dover alone anymore. But somewhere mixed in there, Detective Loki goes to this building and kind of breaks in. Again, this is where those lines are being blurred for the law. He breaks in and he finds Dover there on the floor when Dover was minutes before upstairs torturing Alex. And he ends up giving Detective Loki kind of this broad tour of the place and gets really close and passes the room that Alex is in. Alex is probably in so much pain and disoriented that he doesn't even know what's going on, doesn't know to ask, say for help.
I think at one point you can hear Alex moaning when Loki's on the phone, when he would be paying attention.
The phone rings.
Which this kind of mirrors how close Loki was to catching, to saving the kids, to saving Dover at the end and to saving the kids when they were trapped into the car. Because when he approaches Holly Jones' house in the beginning, and we can touch on all the clues throughout this movie, when he approaches Holly Jones' house at the beginning, he shines a flashlight at the Trans Am, which we know the kids were under there at that point. Yeah. So the theme throughout this movie that they talk about is
so close.
is everyone being prisoners.
Yes.
So the kids are prisoners because they've been kidnapped. They're trapped in that hole. Alex Jones is a prisoner. He's trapped in that apartment building. Everyone else is a prisoner in a way to their emotions. Loki's kind of a prisoner to the confines of his job. There's only so much he can do. Dover's a prisoner to his own guilt, and the mother, Grace, is a prisoner to her grief. So they're all trapped, whether emotionally or physically.
So around this time, this is when Joy gets free, and both sets of parents show up.
Is that why Loki leaves? Or is the call was for Bob Taylor? That's why he leaves.
Yes.
But also, and then after that, Joy gets free.
Yes. So we're skipping around just a little bit here, but Joy Taylor gets free. Joy Birch gets free. And she's in the hospital. She's obviously have had a very rough time. And Keller Dover gets there and is trying to ask questions, It's like, hey, what's going on? Grace Dover is there too, trying to ask questions, trying to figure out things. And this is where Joy said, "You were there." And the reason he was there was because he ended up going to Alex's house because he wasn't getting any information from him. So he went to his aunt's house and trying to get some information, maybe feeling a little bit of guilt too. He wanted to talk to her and just kind of see what was going on.
I think he's trying to get information at this point from Holly Jones. I cannot keep track of her name. He's trying to get information from Holly, not only as to what might be a clue to where he can find the girls or a clue to where Alex might have hidden the girls, but I think he's trying to find out more about Alex to know his intent, because part of
to
him
find more about the maze too,
Yeah.
because he goes over there after Alex says she's in the maze.
Yeah. So he wants to find out what that would mean to him. But I think another part of it too is his guilt for torturing Alex. And I think part of him wants to know to what extent Alex is capable of involvement in this, if there is other factors at play. You know, so he's kind of asking her questions, prodding he asks about the father, the relationship to the father. And then he kind of steps back and says that, oh, that's none of my business.
Yeah.
So I think he's trying to find out all the pieces involved.
So while this is all going on, the girls are in the house because Joy can hear his voice. So back at the hospital, Dover's like, oh, I know where my girl's at. And he runs out. And the way that this all went down, it made him seem suspicious. So Loki is in pursuit. But he ends up losing him. And he believes that he's going to the apartment building where he has Alex. And he ends up finding Alex. But Dover's not there. Dover went back to the house.
To Holly's house.
To the aunts of Alex, Holly. And he gets into the house. He's talking with her. And she pulls a gun on him. The man who's prepared for everything. He had a gun in his toolbox, his little sling, his bag that he had with him. But he just wasn't prepared enough.
Just one step too slow again in this movie.
Yep, just again. So he's forced to drink the
LSD ketamine cocktail. Yeah, which is if you have a complaint that the girl's Joy heard him, she could have called out to him. Presumably the whole time Anna and Joy both are drugged on this cocktail to keep them mute and, you know, catatonic.
Passed out maybe.
Yeah. So it's just in a drugged up state that she, I'm sure, heard Keller's voice and maybe and was able to catch a glimpse of him or something. There's no way they could have called out for help in that state.
So Holly Jones ends up getting Keller Dover to come outside. They move the Trans Am that was in the yard that you were referencing earlier that Detective Loki was at when he first went to this house. And Holly told Dover to get into that hole that was beneath the car. And he gets into the hole and she drives the car back over. And
she shoots him.
He's trapped.
She shoots him before he gets in the hole as well.
In the leg, yep.
Yeah.
And he's handcuffed as well. And he ends up finding his daughter's whistle. And Detective Loki goes back to the house and he ends up finding the girl and shooting Holly because she turned around and tried to shoot him. She did get him, skimmed him in the head, and then he shot her dead, grabbed the girl, rushed into the hospital, which was a very anxious scene.
Yeah, they filmed it really well in a way.
Made you really feel like, oh no, he found her, but now they're gonna die in the car accident right here on the road because he can't see. He's got so much emotion going through him. Like something bad's gonna happen.
Yeah. So throughout the movie, they have a lot of POV shots from within vehicles, within houses, whether it's from inside a car through a window or from inside a house through a window, and we think it represents kind of being locked in or trapped in, the feeling of being behind the glass, of being imprisoned, you know, for the namesake of the movie. This part of the movie is filmed within the car. They show out the windshield and the window is splattered with rain. There's distortion for, what would you call that, from the lights?
Okay.
So all the lights, street lights, headlights, everything, seems near impossible to see. Plus Loki squinting through one eye as blood covers his other eye. And then just him driving straight through red lights, him drifting around corners. It fills you with dread because not only is there the ticking clock of he needs to get to the hospital in time because this girl has just been injected with a lethal dose of a drug. There's also, are they going to make it to the hospital at all, period, point blank, because this reckless driving that he's having to use to get there.
Yeah, and he has his lights on, but there's no siren on his car.
He's just flashing.
I mean, he's a detective. He's not normally chasing people in his car, you know.
As I'm approaching an intersection with a green light, I'm not usually like looking far down to both sides to check to cross the road. There's a green light ahead.
Yeah. But a day or so goes by and Dover has yet to be found. The girl is rescued. She's alive. Detective Loki is taken care of with his head. And
so that newspaper segment that is at the part you're mentioning right now is where my backseat directing segment comes in, if you want me to go into that real quick.
It's not yet. I was going to just talk about how the movie wrapped up.
Okay.
So the Dover is still missing, and they suspect that he just kind of ran away from this crime of punishing Alex, right? And no one knows where he's at. The wife hasn't heard from him or anything, and they're talking about how he's probably going to go to jail when he does show himself. And Detective Loki's back at Holly's house, and they're excavating the backyard, looking for any other bodies and clues and stuff to other cases that maybe have gone unsolved. And as everyone's leaving, it's Detective Loki there last, and he hears a whistle. It sounds kind of like a bird. It's very faint. And he's like, what was that? And then he hears it again and again and again. And he's like, what is going on? And he kind of turns around, turns towards the camera, and then the camera cuts. The movie's over. So we don't know 100% if Dover got found in time to be saved or not.
So I will say, in my opinion, I wholeheartedly believe, there's no doubt in my mind, Loki's very intelligent, that he's going to uncover beneath the Trans Am, find Dover, get him to the hospital in time, save his life, and he'll go and serve his jail time. I think the bigger question for this movie is, does it matter? Because when you look at Keller Dover's character, I'm sure he wants to live, but if he knows that the sacrifice was either his life or jail time, which those are the two possibilities we're looking at for him, death or a lot of time in prison, he's fine with either, knowing that his daughter is safe. If he knew that he saved his daughter's life, then I think ultimately the ending from there on doesn't even matter. I think the point is that he did save her, though. Yes. But which do you believe? Do you think he saved him?
Yes. Yeah, I think Detective Loki would have figured it out fast enough, probably then at that moment.
Yeah.
I believe that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think regardless, ultimately the sacrifice is worth it, whether he lives or dies, because he cares about his daughter more than himself. You know. But so that is the entire plot of the movie. It's gripping from start to finish. It's, I think, a near perfect film. It's near my top 10, if not in my top 10.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun being able to
dissect it.
Yeah, this is the most we've ever really dived into a movie, it's so fresh in our mind. I can see the whole movie in my head right now as we're talking about it. But at the end of all of our episodes, we have a segment that we like to call Backseat Directing, where we sit in the director's chair and kind of make changes or even stand with the decisions of the director for a movie or show. So Andrew, let's kind of go into our backseat directing now. Is there any critiques or anything that you would change in this movie, or do you just have things to praise that you would kind of keep the same?
So I have just one such a small thing to add, and it's not even to me a critique. Far be it from me to critique Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah.
And I will go out there and critique amazing directors, but
we've done it before.
We'll do it again. But every actor I was watching when in their press, when they said, "Why did you sign on to this movie?" pretty much every one of them said, "Well, read the script. It was page turner. Script was fantastic. The cast looked great if they weren't the first one to sign on, but when I looked at the source material like this, I knew it had to be handled by a talented, nuanced, skilled director." And most of them were saying they signed on because of Denis, because of his previous works. And I think that he absolutely destroyed it with this movie. Like I said, near perfect, amazing directing. The one small thing that I would add is literally a 10-second scene. What I would add to this movie is so they quickly show you with the newspaper that Alex has been reunited with his family, which I presume is that mother from the first third of the film. I would add
who lived in the house in the very beginning of the movie that was for sale, where the RV was originally parked in front of.
So he has still some connection to that house, but the emotionality that I wanted to see is she says, the tape of Alex is getting worn out, because I watch it every day after breakfast. I wish they would have started with an opening morning shot She puts her dishes in the sink, and she goes and puts the tape in, and there's a knock at the door. And when she opens it, he's kind of standing in the background, like he kind of huddles out, because Paul Dano said he saw the character kind of like as a meek, wounded animal. So he kind of huddles out like that, not really knowing how to approach the situation. And the mom just puts her hand to her mouth, gasps, like tears start flowing. And maybe that quick clip just ends with her giving Alex a hug. So basically just showing the reuniting of that cathartic moment for the mother. And I think this movie has so many sad beats, so many epic, thrilling beats. But like I said, we're on the edge of an emotional cliff the whole movie. So some of that catharsis at the end, I think, would have been nice. We have the small moments of the girls being returned. But I think that additional moment would have helped with, there's such a large amount of heavy moments. I think we could have done with that one more little moment of, reprieve.
I have to say, I disagree with you. I don't think we needed that.
I don't think we necessarily needed it, but I would have liked it.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine that in my head of like how it would play out. And I just don't see it fitting to me. Because I think this is the way that I feel like it would go down. I feel like it would go down where a police officer is knocking on the door and informs the mother of the situation, and she has to go meet him at an institution. Because one, he's been kidnapped, he's done some bad things, like he was kind of involved in this a little bit. And then also he's like been beaten to a pulp, so like I don't see him really recovering in any time that would fit the timeline of the rest of the story there, so like.
It could have been her getting introduced to him at the hospital still. Yeah. He would likely have been in the hospital before being charged with anything. Then you missed
the parallels that I think you were talking about.
Or maybe they just show a phone call with her to show her reaction.
Yeah. But I see where you're going. How you want to see the emotionality of that part, but
because Alex was such a big part of the story.
Yeah, I kind of like it the way that it is. In terms of my backseat directing segment, I think one question could be asked of why have Bob Taylor in the movie? Why have him in there? Is he just to distract and all that stuff? And I'm actually going to take the side of the director and keep him in the film. I like how it's a slight misdirect, and I like how it shows the emotional impact that these kids are going through, how much it's messing them up
for the rest of their life.
Right, to where it makes the stakes a little bit higher for me of how important it is to find these kids. Even though it's already very important, right?
Yeah.
But now we can see like what could really happen if
they
really
live.
Don't find them.
Yeah. You mean that seeing what could happen is in finding bodies?
Yeah. Finding bodies, but then also if somehow the kids live, that they turn into another Bob Taylor.
Yeah.
It kind of brings it full circle. We kind of get to see like the different stages of these kids throughout their time being kidnapped, right? We get to see them kidnapped. We get to see one that stayed with the kidnappers, and then we got to see one that got away, but is so messed up that it's almost worse,
Yeah, I understand that. I think that Bob Taylor brings a lot to the film in terms of mostly distraction, in terms of you not thinking that it's Holly Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time I watched it, I did not suspect Holly Jones. I think it's a brilliant kind of movie that makes you feel foolish at the end for not seeing what they put right in front of you, with scenes like the way she distracts him away from the Trans Am, or the way Loki takes the RV and rolls it along the dresser, and it lines up on the shot right in front of her.
Very beginning of the movie.
They show you clues throughout. Yeah.
Watching it the second time, you're like, how is it not her? How there's no other person that it could be. Like, it's her. Like, just get her, arrest her, and search the house better.
Yeah. But I did not feel that way the first time. So I think Bob Taylor plays a role in that, which is potentially important to the film.
Yes. this is kind of still like the backseat directing segment a little bit. You asked me to bring this up again for you, of how good Dover is at lying in this movie.
Yes. So Dover's a phenomenal liar, and you'll notice it in the quick way he responds. I think what a lot of people underestimate in lying is, rather than being about creativity, being about preparedness. If you have a prepared response for the questions you know they're going to ask, your lies sound phenomenal. Like when he hops into the car, he says to Loki, he says all these things that are phenomenally believable lies. Like he says, oh, I was trying to walk around to convince myself not to take a drink, but when I saw you, it convinced me to take that first sip. Haven't drank in years. Why are you out here? Oh, I thought it sounded better than telling my wife I drive around aimlessly in my truck because I don't know what to do. He has them like it's the truth, like he has them
he's
ready.
Definitely in that liquor store going through different possible questions that might come up and finding reasonings for each of his actions, like why was he heading over that way and stuff. And he answers it, but he also like takes a pause before he answers the questions too, as if like he's like, all right, is this exactly what I'm gonna say, kind of thing.
He's incredibly smart. And the other thing I want to talk about in Dover's character is the biblical parallels. We have biblical parallels throughout the movie in terms of the cross on Detective Loki's hand, the tattoo, the cross that hangs in Keller Dover's car, his biblical prayers that he recites. I think that he represents Jesus Christ, because he not only is a carpenter, but he is the center that holds up the household. He kind of is the strong presence that holds up the family and bears everything on his shoulders, kind of like Jesus bears the cross. And throughout the movie, we see him symbolically take on the sins of man. He takes on all the wrongdoing in the film in terms of doing whatever he believes is necessary to save innocence. So whereas Jesus took responsibility for the sins of man in order to seek forgiveness for man, Keller Dover takes on the sins of man by enacting those sins on Alex Jones.
That's an interesting parallel. You mentioned it as we were watching it too. You're like, you know who else is a carpenter? Jesus.
You might know his name.
Andrew, do you have anything else to add to this episode? I think we kind of broke down this movie in depth.
Really in depth. I want to thank everybody for listening. Thank you for taking the time, especially if you made it this far.
Yes, we appreciate you. Again, we post a new episode every Monday and Thursday. And the last few weeks, we've been putting out bonus episodes sprinkled in there as well. We've been hustling to put out these episodes for you guys. We appreciate you listening. And
that's a wrap.